Hello, and welcome to Grey.com Talks With. Today, we're talking with Jen Campbell, Executive Director at Domestic Violence Solutions for Santa Barbara County, an organization that provides safety, shelter, and support for individuals and families affected by domestic violence, and collaborates with community partners to raise awareness regarding the cause, prevalence, and the impact of domestic violence. And if you're new to our podcast, please press subscribe button either on YouTube or your podcast app, because today we're going to learn about an organization that envisions that all people take responsibility for promoting zero tolerance of domestic violence. Hello, Jen. Welcome to Grey.com Talks With. We're excited to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kareem, for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
How would you describe domestic violence solutions for someone who is not familiar with your work?
So Domestic Violence Solutions is a community-based organization in Santa Barbara County in Southern California, Central California, actually. And our main focus, our main core mission is to provide emergency shelter and support for individuals fleeing domestic violence. So we have 2 safe houses and 1 facility for permanent housing. So the providing a place where people can go to feel safe, to get their lives back on track, that's our core mission. But surrounding that are other services such as counseling and clinical support. So for people that need therapy for themselves or for their family, we have a housing division that helps people that are fleeing domestic violence secure transitional housing or permanent housing, because in the United States, survivors or victims of domestic violence are considered homeless by the Health and Human Services Category 4. So they're fleeing, they're homeless. So a big part of what we do is help people find secure housing. And then the third thing that we do is we provide, or we have an entire service based around developing life and job skills, because oftentimes, even though domestic violence is not just experienced by one gender, it's primarily most of our clients are female, and when they come to us, oftentimes they have no money. They've never had a job. Sometimes they've never had to even deal with, a bank account. So what we try to do is get them on the path to living an independent life by first strengthening them and then helping them find employment or at least get access to social services, because oftentimes they're completely isolated and don't know how to do that. So we really try to have wraparound services for people fleeing domestic violence and their children. Of course, we can't do everything ourselves, so we have 23 other agencies within the county for whom we have memorandums of understanding so that we can refer our clients. And then we refer to about 90 different agencies throughout the state and actually throughout the country for people to support victims fleeing domestic violence. So that was a long answer to a short question.
I can imagine the trauma that people, individuals and families experience when fleeing domestic violence from their home, and they are in need of a safe space, and organizations such as yours who are there to provide first-hand help for them to feel secure for at least a short period of time under the provided housing. And when they feel more secure, you provide necessary skills for them to get back on their life. And that's a beautiful work, although the circumstances of it is terrible, horrific. But then there is a chance and there is a platform for individuals and families, survivors of domestic violence, to get back on track and build their lives again. You
mentioned exactly.
You are focusing on domestic violence, and I want to talk about the issue itself. What are the causes and prevalence and the impact of domestic violence on the individuals and families who go through that?
Well, first thing to understand is domestic violence, or intimate partner violence, as we call it, is really the culmination of a lot of different factors. Domestic violence tends to be intergenerational. So when people grow up in a violent household, or violence is the only activity that they see as a resolution to problems, then they tend to carry that forward. So many times, children who have grown up in an abusive household either can become abusers or allow themselves to be abused. So we see this intergenerational pattern sort of over and over again. There are all kinds of social and emotional factors that go into creating having someone be an abuser or abused. So there's a lot of, I'm not sure if you are familiar with, we call it ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. So we have a scoring system so that you can tell by how many ACEs factors a child has, whether they have a propensity to have a lower degree of education, not do well in school, have substance abuse issues. And so all of that sort of feeds into this ecosystem of sort of powerlessness on the part of the abused, and a seeking of power or control on the part of the abuser. So domestic violence is a cycle. It's all about power and control. So, in the last year, since we've been living through, the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a lot more. We've seen an uptick in family violence. Not so much people coming into our shelter, but because they're scared, and abusers are manipulative, and they use isolation as one of their main tools. So we've been able to see this pattern of family violence escalate, and then it's exacerbated by substance abuse, alcoholism, certainly inequities in poverty. When people lose their jobs or there's financial pressure, then that tends to really throw fuel on the fire. I think that, I try to keep a positive attitude. It's been horrific the last year to read about the uptick in violence, all over the world, particularly in the United States. I just had this conversation this morning with my husband about, another shooting. Again, guns are, and this is my personal opinion, I think the United States has more guns than all the other countries combined. And so we've had victims shot. We've had, law enforcement considers domestic violence calls the most dangerous. We just had a shooting in our North County yesterday, a DV situation. So, but what we try to do as an agency, and I know we're going to get into awareness building, but we try to break that cycle of intergenerational violence by reaching out to younger people, teaching them about healthy relationships, teaching them about ways to handle their feelings so that they don't continue that into the future. So that's prevention, is really intervening in an upstream point is much more effective than intervention. By the time people get to our shelter, they've suffered a lot. So anyway, that's, I could go on and on about the causes. And Blue Shield actually of California did a very in-depth review of the causes of domestic violence and prevention. And they have various intervention points, but almost all of them start with young people, even as young as elementary school children. So.
Yeah, when we think about domestic violence, obviously it's a complicated issue. There are so many factors that result in individuals seeking power in a relationship, but we tend to forget the impact that those abusers they had when they were growing up. For instance, you mentioned it's a majority of cases, many cases are intergenerational. So a child growing in a home where he or she sees violence being used, handled, they don't know the other way of handling life. And then they grow up to be, so the cycle continues. And in order to break that cycle, you mentioned that you are focusing on talking to teenagers, and as well as the research has shown that the best time that can be started is talking through the children's school school children. So it's important to break that cycle early on, so the children see that there is a new way, there is a different way of handling life. Could you please tell in detail how are you training children, or how are you approaching children and young adults and teenagers on raising awareness for them and educating them about the impacts of domestic violence?
So it's been a little different this past year because we haven't been able to do things in person, but all throughout the year, we go into all of the high schools, and we're starting to go into the junior highs. So we're dealing with teens that are, let's say, 13 through 18, and there's a big difference in age. And so we have a curriculum that talks about what is a healthy relationship and how to know if you're in an unhealthy relationship. Excuse me, just one second. Turn off my phone. Sorry about that. So oftentimes, particularly teenagers, and believe me, I raised two girls, and they almost put me over the edge as teenagers. But they don't realize, I think for the most part, and actually teen dating violence it's about 50% boys and girls. So it's not just girls who are suffering through unhealthy relationships, it could be boys too. So what we try to do is go into the schools. We teach what does a healthy relationship look like, how to set boundaries, how to respect yourself. A lot of these core issues come from a lack of self-esteem or self-value. And so we have a whole curriculum around really how to not just how to say no, but how to really set boundaries. Teens are they're very peer driven. So they don't want to be on the outs. We also teach people about how to deal with, digital violence, because there's a huge amount of that. I mean, access to social media and the impact of social media on teenagers and healthy relationships is horrific. I had a mom and her daughter come in. I'm in our administrative office, so this isn't even our shelter, but I had a mom and her daughter come in this past year, and the young woman showed me how her boyfriend was sending like hundreds of text messages a day to try to control her. I mean, the logical answer is, well, just change your phone number, get rid of your phone. It's like that's their lifeline. They don't want to do that. So it's how to set boundaries, and then how do you go to a trusted adult and ask for help? Teenagers don't really, that's not their proclivity. They'd rather go to their peer group. So, we have, and we work with other agencies. There's one in town specifically that we work with that has after school groups really to support healthy relationships. And it's very effective. And it's been shown that if teenagers get a good start on this, they feel empowered to be able to take care of themselves. They don't get into the victim mentality, which is it's really difficult to get out of that. So it's heartbreaking for me to see this sort of, you can see the power and control on both sides. I mean, girls can be equally as, as committed to, negative behavior as boys are. So anyway, I don't know if that answered your question, but we're trying to do a lot more outreach. We cover a very wide county, and we're a very small organization. So we use a lot of volunteers to do that. We work, again, with other youth agencies to make sure we make presentations to boys and girls clubs, youth sports organizations. Youth sports is a really good way to get into that. Particularly, there's an organization that we've done training with called A Call to Men, and that's a great organization. And they have a coaching curriculum where we go in and work with the coaches, and then the coach actually talks to their athletes about what it's like to be in a healthy relationship. It's very effective.
Mm. That's wonderful. When we think about the school, we only think about academics, but then in school, children can learn life essential skills as well through awareness campaigns that your organization does. And you mentioned that you focus on teaching them what is a healthy relationship. For teens, it's very important because they are just starting dating. They're seeing their first experience of what is a relationship is like. So if they see that the first one is toxic, abusive, then their perception of relationship will change. And you mentioned it has a negative impact on their self-esteem and then self-confidence, and the fact that you are teaching them what is right way and how to take care of themselves, how to stand up for themselves. Those are the skills that will help them to succeed both in personal and professional life when they move on into adulthood.
Yes, absolutely.
Besides raising awareness among school children, you also have a program called 40-Hour Domestic Violence Training Certification. Could you please tell us who is this program intended for and what does it cover?
So it's a program created in California. It's monitored by the state of California through the California Office of Emergency Services and the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. So anyone that wants to work with or works with or wants to work with victims or survivors of domestic violence has to have this 40-hour training. And it's primarily focuses on, first of all, understanding the power and control wheel. What are the symptoms of domestic violence? Most of it's online right now, but we talk about dealing with specifically with law enforcement, how to deal with getting emergency protective orders, restraining orders. We talk about how do you work with someone in trauma? You have to be able to be trauma informed and really client centered. So how to do that in a DV situation? It's oftentimes, and I can't remember, it's actually someone very famous. It's a singer, and her name just escaped me. Which she got tired of people asking her, "Why didn't you just leave?" Mm-hmm. And that's like the wrong question to ask a DV survivor. Oh, it was the young woman who was in the relationship with Shia LaBeouf. She just said, "I'm not answering that question anymore." I think it was Gayle King that asked her the question. Well, if you're in a bad relationship, why don't you just leave? So that puts the blame onto the victim. And so what we try to do is avoid victim blaming. And so when we deal with clients in a either in the shelter or in a non-residential environment, we teach all of our staff has to go through the 40-hour training. We also train law enforcement and healthcare workers primarily on what is the sort of the mental ecosystem of the survivor. And it's really how to be trauma informed and not victim blame, because that's a big, big part of why people don't come forward. They feel shame. They're scared. they feel like it's their fault. So we go through a series of, we have our clinicians do one or two of the modules to teach people how to ask the right kind of questions. Because when you're talking to somebody that's been abused, that's in trauma, that's scared, they may not always give you the not the correct answer, but the most honest answer so that we can help them. And then we also, as part of the training, we bring in our district attorney, and they talk about what avenues are open to victims of domestic violence. There are compensation programs if they've lost jobs or they've lost their housing. So we kind of give them an overview of really what it's like to work with a survivor, and then there's a whole children's section on how to deal with children that have lived through a DV situation. So it's very comprehensive, and we do it both in English and in Spanish because we have quite a few monolingual Spanish speaker case managers that work with. There's a very large agricultural community in the north part of the county, and there's a lot of DV, in and around that. So,
yeah, the program seems very resourceful and very broad. So every case is covered. When you think about social workers, we understand that social workers need to have training, need to learn how to interact with domestic violence survivors. But we often forget that law enforcement, people who work in law enforcement are usually the first ones who see the victims of domestic violence if they choose to call 911 or choose to report it. So it's very important for law enforcement to not, you mentioned, not to blame the victims, but rather listen to the victims and make sure they feel understood and feel safe that they can share their stories. So it's very, because they are the first
responders.
First responders. So usually, I'm not sure about the United States, but in third world countries, in underdeveloped countries, police doesn't take care about domestic violence issues. So training police on making sure that domestic violence issues are very important and the victims need help. It's very essential and key to making sure that the victims feel safe and are under the shelter and are brought to organizations such as yours. So thank you for providing that training program for law enforcement.
I just want to make one comment about law enforcement. So we, in our area that we cover, we work with 9 different law enforcement agencies, and they're all slightly different. And some actually are more evolved than others. Let's just put it that way. But it's difficult. It's been very difficult, particularly people that are not undocumented. Let's just say that they don't want to call law enforcement. They're afraid they're going to be deported. And again, abusers will use that as a tool to keep control over their victims. We've done a really good job of training our law enforcement partners on how to ask those kind of questions. Oftentimes, they're going to get in a situation where they can't figure out who it's a co-combatant situation. Maybe the abuser, the abused is trying to defend themselves, and so they don't really know. That's when they'll call us in, and we do respond out with law enforcement if necessary. We'll provide the information about our shelter. We'll allow, we tell people, if you're not ready to come into the shelter, call us. But most of our clients, even though DV is the number one call to law enforcement, we don't get enough calls from law enforcement because people are scared, and oftentimes, let's just say in a classic situation, it's a male abuser and a female victim. If there's no financial support for the victim, they're still depending on the abuser, and so they don't want that person to go to jail. They don't want that person to be taken out of their lives. They just want the abuse to stop. So it's a really sticky, messy situation, and I feel sorry for law enforcement having to step into that because we are asking our law enforcement officers not to just be peacekeepers or protectors. We're asking them to be social workers and clinicians. And I had one chief of police tell me if I could put a social worker in every single police car, I would do it, but there's no funding for that. So again, a very complicated situation with law enforcement.
Yeah, based on your description, based on the uniqueness of some of the cases, dependency on the financial dependency on the abuser, I can see how it can be complicated for law enforcement to be a part of such a scenario. So thank you for clarifying that. So if someone would like to support your organization, how can they do that?
Probably the best way would be to go on our website because we have a donate. We have a donate tab. We are we're primarily funded by public funding, but we're very lucky to get a lot of private donations. All of our donations go straight to our programs. Our website, excuse me, is www.dvsolutions.org. And if anyone needs information about domestic violence or support, there are a number of domestic violence hotlines. The national hotline is a good one, but on our website, it's we have all of our crisis line information as well. So, we're certainly happy to and welcome any kind of financial contributions. We need that. We have a lot of particularly during the pandemic, we devoted a lot of our resources primarily to children. We had people staying in our shelters, and they were not only having to try to go to work if they worked, but homeschool their children. So we got, we built out the Wi-Fi. We got laptops and tablets for the kids. It's been a challenging year, Kareem.
Yeah, there are a lot of expenses, and the funding from private donors or the public funding can help survivors and victims to be under the protection of such organizations as yours, Domestic Violence Solutions. So the link to the Domestic Violence Solutions will be provided in the description to their website, so you listening or viewing can learn more about the wonderful work that Jan and her team are doing, and familiarize yourself. And if you wish to support them, you could donate and make financial contribution. Thank you so much, Jan. It was great to get to know you, and thank you for educating us about domestic violence.
Thank you so much for having me and for caring and for doing the kind of work that you guys do, because any awareness raising is huge, particularly as you mentioned throughout the world. I mean, we're lucky in the state of California and in the United States, I think, but particularly women all over the developing world have some real issues. So I'm sending you a virtual hug. Your mom must be proud of you.
Thank you. For you listening, if you enjoyed this conversation, please press like and share button, because this will show the YouTube and podcast algorithm that this conversation is important, that we need to educate people on the causes, prevalence, and the impact of domestic violence to stop it. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.